It's the tail end of the last ice age. Somewhere in what will one day be called Europe, it's cold in a way you have never actually experienced. The kind of cold that isn't weather, it's a predator. You're sitting by a fire because the fire's the only reason you're still alive. And out past the edge of the light, in the dark where the warmth doesn't reach, there's a pair of eyes watching you. It's a wolf. Now everything you know screams that this is bad. A wolf at the edge of your camp is a threat, a competitor, possibly the last thing you'll ever see. And the wolf, for its part, knows that you are the terrifying pink thing that throws sharp rocks. By every rule of survival, you two should want nothing to do with each other. And yet, night after night, the wolf comes a little closer. And one night, instead of throwing a rock, you throw a scrap of meat. This is the story of one of the strangest, most unlikely, and most emotionally loaded decisions our species ever made. The decision to look at another animal, an animal that wasn't food, that didn't work, that offered no obvious survival benefit, and think, I want you to stay. This is the story of how humans started keeping pets. And here's the part nobody tells you. You probably think you tamed them. You think humans, the clever apes with the sharp rocks, reached out and domesticated the animal kingdom through sheer dominance. The truth is so much weirder than that, because the evidence suggests that in a lot of cases, the animals chose us, and whatever is asleep on your couch right now, your dog, your cat, the creature that owns roughly 40% of your bed, is the direct descendant of a bond that is older than farming, older than writing, older than nearly everything you were taught to call civilization. Let's start with the problem, because keeping a pet, from a pure survival standpoint, is completely insane. Think about it. For nearly all of human history, calories were the entire game. You woke up hungry, you spent your day trying to not be hungry, and you frequently failed. Food was scarce, effort was expensive, and every single thing you did had to earn its keep. A working animal makes sense. It hunts with you, it guards the camp, it pulls a load. A food animal makes sense. You eat it. But a pet, an animal you feed, and shelter, and protect, and grieve when it dies, and get absolutely nothing material in return, that is a luxury. That is the behavior of a species with calories to burn on pure affection. And humans were doing it tens of thousands of years before we had any business affording it. So why? Why would a starving Ice Age human give away food they needed to an animal that couldn't pay them back? To answer that, we have to talk about the first and most important animal in this entire story, the dog. Here's the thing that will reframe how you think about your dog forever. Your dog is a wolf. Genetically, a domestic dog and a gray wolf are almost identical. A chihuahua, a creature that looks like an anxiety disorder wearing a sweater, is a wolf. And the question of how we got from one to the other is one of the great detective stories in science. For a long time, the assumed answer was the obvious one. Some clever hunter found a wolf den, stole a cute puppy, raised it, tamed it, and boom, dog. Simple. Human ingenuity conquers nature. Except that's almost certainly not what happened. And the real story is far more interesting. The leading theory now is called self-domestication, and it flips the whole thing on its head. Picture those Ice Age camps again. Wherever humans lived, they created something irresistible. Garbage, scraps, bones, offal, the leftovers of the hunt piled up at the edge of camp. To a wolf, that's a free buffet, but approaching a human camp is terrifying, so there's a filter. The wolves that were bold enough, or more accurately, friendly enough, calm enough, less aggressive, less fearful. Those wolves could tolerate being near humans long enough to eat. The jumpy, aggressive ones fled, or got killed. So generation after generation, the gene pool of these camp-following wolves selected for one trait above all others: friendliness, not intelligence, not strength. The ability to be chill around a human. And here's where it gets genuinely wild. We have proof this works, and it happened in a lab in the 20th century. A Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment with silver foxes, breeding them for one single trait: tolerance of humans. Just, does this fox freak out less than the others? That's it. Within just a few generations, something bizarre happened. The foxes didn't just get tamer, they started to physically change. Their ears got floppy, their tails got curly, their coats developed patches of white. They started barking and wagging and seeking human attention. By selecting for friendliness alone, he accidentally recreated the entire look of a dog. Floppy ears, spotted coat, the whole package. It's called domestication syndrome, and it means tameness and cuteness are genetically linked. The friendlier an animal gets, the more it starts to look like something you want to cuddle. Nature did to wolves over thousands of years what Belyaev did to foxes in decades. The wolves that could be near us became the animals that made us want them near us, but friendliness alone doesn't make a pet. Somewhere in there, a line got crossed from tolerated scavenger to loved companion. And we actually have the moment, or at least a moment, frozen in the ground. It's a grave in Germany called Bonn-Oberkassel, and it's around 14,000 years old. Inside, archaeologists found two humans buried together, and buried with them, deliberately, carefully, was a dog. But this isn't just any dog. When they examined the bones, they found the animal had been sick as a puppy, gravely sick, with a severe case of what was likely canine distemper, a disease that would have left it unable to eat, unable to function, for weeks. In the wild, that puppy dies. It just does. There is no way it survives that illness on its own, which means someone kept it warm, someone hand-fed it, someone cleaned up after a sick, useless puppy that offered them nothing for weeks through an Ice Age winter, purely because they didn't want it to die. And when that dog eventually did die, years later, they buried it with their own dead. That is not a working relationship. That is not livestock. That is love, 14,000 years ago, preserved in bone. Someone looked at a dying animal and decided its life was worth saving, for no reason other than that they cared about it. That is the oldest evidence we have of what you feel for your pet, and it predates agriculture entirely. Okay? Deep breath, because now we have to talk about the cat. And cats, as anyone who has ever owned one will tell you, are a completely different story. If dogs are the friend who chose to stay, cats are the roommate who moved in, never signed a lease, and now technically owns the apartment. The dog story is about companionship. The cat story is about pest control and mutual convenience, and cats have never let us forget it. Cats show up in the human timeline much later than dogs, and for a very specific reason. They needed us to invent farming first. Here's the logic. Around 10 to 12,000 years ago, humans started growing and, crucially, storing grain, and a giant pile of stored grain is a 5-star resort for mice and rats, and where there are rodents, there is dinner for a small, patient, murder-shaped predator. The African wildcat, the ancestor of every house cat on Earth, figured out that human granaries were the greatest hunting ground ever created. So they moved in, not because they liked us, because we had accidentally built them an all-you-can-eat rodent buffet. And humans, watching these cats slaughter the vermin that were eating their food supply, thought, you know what, stay as long as you like. It was the perfect deal. We got pest control. They got food and shelter. Nobody had to like anybody. And this is why scientists say cats are barely domesticated even today. Genetically, your house cat is almost unchanged from its wild ancestor. A dog is fundamentally different from a wolf. A cat is basically a wild cat that has agreed, conditionally, to live in your house. And yet, even with cats, something more than convenience crept in. On the island of Cyprus, archaeologists found a grave around 9,500 years old. A human, buried with a cat, laid carefully beside them. And here's the kicker. There were never wild cats on Cyprus. Someone had to bring that cat across the sea by boat. You don't load a wild rodent catcher onto a fragile prehistoric boat and risk a sea voyage for a pest control appliance. You do that for something you love. So even the aloof, transactional cat, at the very dawn of its relationship with us, was already worth a dangerous ocean crossing to somebody. And once you get past dogs and cats, the ancient world gets gloriously strange, because no civilization went further with pets than ancient Egypt. We all know the Egyptians loved cats, and that's an understatement so large it's almost offensive. In Egypt, cats weren't just pets, they were sacred, associated with the goddess Bastet. Killing a cat, even by accident, could be punishable by death. When a family cat died, the household would go into mourning, and family members would famously shave off their own eyebrows as a sign of grief. They mummified cats by the millions, preparing them for the afterlife with the same care they gave humans. But it wasn't just cats. Egyptians kept dogs and named them, and we have those names recorded on collars and in tombs. Names like Brave One and Reliable, and one that translates to something like useless, because ancient people were exactly as funny as we are. They kept baboons, they kept ibises, they even, if you were a pharaoh, flexing on the entire world, kept lions. And the Egyptians weren't alone in the naming and the grieving. Jump forward to ancient Rome, and you find something that will feel eerily modern. Wealthy Romans kept small lapdogs, pampered them, and adored them, and when those dogs died, they made them gravestones. We have found Roman pet epitaphs, tombstones for dogs, with inscriptions of genuine grief. One of the most famous mourns a little dog and describes the silence in the house now that the sound of its barking is gone. 2,000 years ago, a Roman stood over the grave of their dog and felt the exact specific emptiness you would feel, the too quiet house, and they carved it into stone so it would last. That grief hasn't changed in 2 millennia. It is maybe the single most human thing in this entire story, but I promised you this wasn't all warm and fuzzy, and here's where we have to be honest about the darker side, because the line between a pet and property, between a beloved companion and a resource, was often horrifyingly thin. In many ancient cultures, animals that were cared for in life were also sacrificed to the gods in death. Dogs in particular were frequently ritually killed and buried as offerings, as guardians for the dead, or as part of religious ceremonies. The same animal that was a guardian and a companion could also be the thing you gave up to appease a higher power. And then there's the hardest truth of all. When times got desperate, when the crops failed and the winter was long, the line between companion and food could vanish entirely. Cultures across history have, in extremity, eaten the very animals they otherwise cherished. It's uncomfortable, and it should be, but it's part of the same story, because it tells you how astonishing the pet bond really is, that an animal could be, at once, potentially food, potentially a sacrifice, and yet still, against all of that pressure, be buried with its arms wrapped around a human child. The love had to be powerful enough to survive right next to all of that, and somehow it was. So let's get to the real question. Why? Why do we do this? Why did a species scraping by on the edge of starvation start pouring love and food and grief into animals that couldn't feed us back? Part of the answer is chemical. When you look at your dog and your dog looks back at you, both of your brains release oxytocin. It's the same bonding hormone that floods a parent's brain when they look at their baby. Dogs, over thousands of years of living with us, evolved to hijack that exact system. They even developed specific muscles in their eyebrows, muscles wolves don't have, that let them make that irresistible sad puppy dog face. That face is not an accident. It is a tool, evolved specifically to trigger the caregiving part of the human brain. Your dog's sad eyes are, in a very real sense, a biological superpower it developed to manipulate you into loving it, and it worked completely. But the deeper answer is about who we are. Humans are compulsive carers and compulsive social bonders. We are wired to nurture, to protect, to form attachments, to read emotion in a face. And that machinery is so powerful, so deeply built into us, that it doesn't stop at the boundary of our own species. We look at an animal, we see something that responds to us, that needs us, that seems to trust us, and the same ancient circuitry that binds us to each other lights up and binds us to them. Keeping a pet isn't a weird cultural quirk. It's what happens when a species built for love finds another creature willing to receive it. Across every civilization on record, in every corner of the world where humans lived, we didn't just use animals. We loved them, we named them, we mourned them, and they, in their own way, learned to love us back. So, why did ancient humans start keeping pets? The honest answer is that it was never really a decision at all. It was an accident of hunger and garbage and mutual convenience that turned, somewhere along the way, into one of the deepest bonds our species has ever formed. It started with a wolf at the edge of the firelight, deciding we were worth the risk, and with a human deciding the same thing right back. And it never stopped. That thread runs unbroken from a 14,000-year-old grave in Germany, through the mourned cats of Egypt and the tombstoned dogs of Rome, all the way to the animal that is, right now, in this exact moment, asleep somewhere near you, completely certain that you will keep it safe. It's not wrong about that, by the way. So the next time your dog rests its head on your knee, or your cat decides, graciously, to sit on you, remember that you are the latest link in a chain that is older than farms, older than cities, older than history itself. You are doing what humans have always done. Two different animals on two sides of a fire, deciding to trust each other in the dark. Go pet your dog. They've been waiting 14,000 years for this. Some friendships are 30,000 years old. Now go pet your dog. They've earned it. Subscribe, because everything you do has an ancient story, and we're just getting started.